I am going to read a small passage from Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and I hope you enjoy it because I certainly did. Men seek retreats for themselves, houses in the country, seashores and mountains, and thou too art wont to desire such things very much. But this is altogether a mark of the most common sort of men, for it is in thy power, whenever thou shalt choose, to retire into thyself. For nowhere either with more quiet or more freedom from trouble does a man retire than into his own soul, particularly when he has within him such thoughts that by looking into them he is immediately in perfect tranquility. And I affirm that tranquility is nothing else than the good ordering of the mind. And yes, I perfectly agree with that statement, because most of the suffering, most of the human suffering that we subject ourselves into is a result of our own souls. It is the opinion of the soul that creates the most suffering for us. It is not external objects, external materialistic objects, because external materialism cannot touch the soul. And it is precisely that, the fact that external objects, it's precisely the fact that external materialism cannot touch the soul. It's precisely that fact that allows us to retreat into our own souls to find peace and tranquility. Because think of it like this: if peace can be found within the soul, then the opposite is also true. If peace can be found, then so can negativity and hatred. But it is not because it is the function of the soul to do that, but rather it is because of the opinions and assumptions that the soul has, in a sense, created, that creates all of this negativity and hatred. So, if you want to find peace and tranquility, then perhaps it is not to, in a sense, retreat from that hatred, to, in a sense, to run away from that hatred, but rather to run towards that hatred and to retreat into thyself, into your own soul, and to order your mind perfectly, and to order your mind simply and justly and morally, so that you can find tranquility. I think that is what that passage is saying. I believe that passage is saying that, life is nothing more than just transformation, and misery is just opinions. In a sense, everything can be, an opinion or an assumption, because everything that we perceive goes through us, goes through our own eyeballs, through our own assumptions and opinions. So in a sense, everything, nothing is truly factual. And if nothing is truly factual, then that means that everything can be perceived as an opinion. And if everything can be perceived as an opinion, then in a sense, all our suffering is something that we have subjected ourselves into. And that's a good thing, because if we are the ones who created our own suffering, then we can also be the ones who free ourselves from that suffering. And now, some people might be thinking, well, I haven't subjected myself to any suffering. Sometimes, some people are bad people. Sometimes life is terrible. Sometimes, a volcano might erupt and take everyone I know, everyone I love away from me. And if I choose to suffer, then it's not my fault. And I agree, sometimes life is not very pleasant. However, I also agree with the fact that, we are the ones who create the opinions of life. So if we are the ones who create the opinions of life, and if sometimes life is unpleasant, then why is it that we choose to suffer when someone else does wrong to us? It's not our fault that it's not our fault that someone else did wrong to us. Yet we are still the ones who are choosing to suffer. So if we are the ones who create these opinions, and if we are the ones who, in a sense, are subjected to the torments of life, then how does that work? Basically, what we are saying is, like, we didn't do anything wrong, but we are still choosing to suffer. That makes no sense, does it? Because why would we do something like that? And the way I see it, humans, pretty much every human to a certain extent is misguided. And that's the way I see it, is a fact. I think every human being, by their nature, is not perfect and is misguided. And some humans are more misguided than others. And if you're someone who subjects yourself to torment that does not, in a sense, make you stronger as a person, I think you are being, in a sense, misguided. And I truly do believe that. Because why subject yourself to anything that does not make you stronger? So going back to the volcano eruption thing, the way I see it, sometimes life is not really pleasant. Sometimes life throws you a curveball and it sucks. It really does suck. However, it is not your fault. So why feel bad about something when it was not your fault, or even when it was not in your own capacity to control? Why feel bad about things like that? That's just how life is. Now, I understand if you feel bad. Sometimes something really, really horrific can happen, and you might feel bad about it, and you might, be in sorrow. I understand that. I'm not saying you're in the wrong for doing that. It's completely understandable. Everyone does that to a certain extent. However, it is not your fault. It is not your fault that any of that happened to you. And the great thing is, even though it's not your fault, you have the power to move on from all of that. That's the great thing. Even though you are not responsible, you have the power to move on. That's the great thing. Because you were given a power in which, in normal circumstances, let's say that you did something wrong, like you actually did something wrong and you actually hurt a bunch of people. Now it's your responsibility as the wrongdoer to make up, to redeem yourself, to atone for your sins. So that's your responsibility. Your responsibility is to become stronger. Now, imagine if you were the one who was wronged. The only responsibility that you have is to move on. You don't have to amend, you don't have to atone, you just have to accept and move on. So basically, your only responsibility is to be happy. That's it. Is to become stronger. And I think that's a wonderful responsibility, because what else is a more pure and stronger responsibility than to achieve strength, than to achieve happiness, than to achieve purity in soul and mind. So that's what I think, at least. So anyway, if you're watching this video, I create all of these videos in the situation, circumstances that I'm no longer here, in case I die. So I want I want the people that I love to remember me by something, and perhaps they might learn something from these videos. And if you did learn something, then I'm happy. So anyway, that's my little rant for today. See you. Bye.